can see the participant numbers coming in, and people are still coming in pretty quickly. So when that starts slowing down a little bit in a minute or two, I'll officially kick us off. All right, why don't we get going? And those of you who are joining us at this moment, hello, my name is Joe Lyou. I'm the president and CEO of the Coalition for Clean Air, which around here we refer to as CCA. Apologize in advance for all the acronyms we'll use. We'll try to spell them out for you before we use them as much as we can. At Coalition for Clean Air, our mission is to protect public health, improve air quality, and prevent climate change. We were founded 54 years ago and have been working to reduce air pollution ever since. You can find out more about our organization at ccair.org. And thank you for joining me today. This is our second Clean Air Conversations webinar about the fires in Southern California. If you joined last week, thank you for joining us again. We will not be going over all of the same things that we discussed in our first webinar, although you might hear some things repeated. If you'd like to watch the first webinar, you can find the link on our website at ccair.org. And for those of you who have suffered losses because of these fires, I mean, there are tens of thousands of you, and you have my sympathy and the sympathy of all of us at Coalition for Clean Air and the sympathy of our experts who are joining us here today. We know that your number one priority is dealing with the losses that you've suffered. We are here to try to help however we can. We hope to answer your questions and to share with you some useful information. If you need additional information and resources, please look at the LA County Recovers website at recovery.lacounty.gov. That's recovery.lacounty.gov. Might not answer all your questions, but there's a lot of resources that have been consolidated there from a lot of different agencies. If you're a first responder, thank you. Thank you for working to save our communities and to save our lives. We want you to know that we recognize and appreciate the heroic effort that you have made and you continue to make, and that we will forever be in your debt. Today's webinar was made possible in part from the support of the Natural Resources Defense Council and by donations from you and others like you who support our work. Thank you to NRDC, and thank you if you've donated recently. If you'd like to support the Coalition for Clean Air, just go to our website at ccair.org. I also want to thank Zoom. When we did the webinar last week, Zoom bumped up our hosting capacity so we could accommodate more than 7,700 people who attended, and they didn't charge us for it. So thanks, Zoom. We really appreciate it. This afternoon, we'll be talking about some complicated issues. And I've probably been reading way too much about these fires and going down way too many rabbit holes. But here's something that I've noticed as time has gone on, the experts, the news stories, and the government agencies start tending to agree more and more on the status of things and what should be done. We do, however, still see some small differences of opinion and minor inconsistencies. We're committed to providing you the absolute best information we can. We'll do everything possible to make sure that information that we pass along to you is accurate, reliable, and consistent with what other experts are saying. We want you to be as fully informed as possible as you decide what's best for you and for your family. Let me see, where am I? We recognize that there's a lot to worry about as we fight and recover from these fires. We're going to get through this. The Los Angeles community is going to come together like never before. Yes, there are many things like hazardous waste and air pollution and water quality that may pose a threat But by participating in this webinar and following the advice of experts on how to reduce your exposure to toxic chemicals, the threats will be minimized. After the webinar last week, some people focused really only on the negative news, and that's not what we intended. We want you to be aware of the danger of exposure to smoke and ash and to contaminated water, but we also want you to know what to do about it. And as long as you are careful, you should be okay. Here's what to expect this afternoon. This is our agenda. I'll be reviewing a few housekeeping items first, and then we'll hear from Katie Butler, the director of the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. Director Butler will talk about her agency's response to the fires, the hazardous waste, and what to do about it. I'll be up after Director Butler to talk about air quality issues, including how best to decide whether you need to be concerned about the air that you're breathing and what you should do if the air quality is bad, and what you should do to minimize your exposure to toxic chemicals and ash. Dr. Mark Gold of the Natural Resources Defense Council will then explain what you should know about the impact of the fires on drinking water and ocean water quality. We will conclude by answering questions that you post by selecting the Q&A tab, at least to the best of our ability. If you see a question you want answered, you can click the thumbs up icon next to that question to promote it, and we will prioritize the questions that you promote. We're not going to open up that Q&A tab until later, so I'll talk about that in a second. We plan on finishing at 4:30, and that's a pretty hard stop for a Friday afternoon for us. So sorry if we don't get to all of your questions, but we'll do the best that we can. So now onto these housekeeping items. We are recording this event. We will post it on YouTube as soon as we can, and we'll send the link to our email list. If you signed up for this webinar on our website, you are now on our email list. If you didn't, and you got the link from someone else, you can sign up for our emails at ccr.org, or just check our website in a couple of days, maybe early next week. Some of the subjects we're going to talk about today may be really upsetting, and for those of you who have suffered losses and too much to bear. So please, feel free to leave if you need to. And we're going to record this and we're going to post it so you can come back when you're in a better place and at a better time to watch it and to learn from what we have to say. You should know that there are maybe members of the media in the audience today. We ask that reporters not quote anyone without first giving consent, and thank you for respecting that request. You guys did a really good job of that for the last webinar, so thank you. If you're a member of the audience and not on the panel, you're going to be muted. We have far too many people to allow you to unmute, so please, and don't even try to raise your hand. I think we've disabled that function. We'll be taking only the written questions in that Q&A tab only. And you can start posting those Q&A questions once we get to that agenda item, and we'll open that up for you at that time. If we stay on time, we'll probably get to your questions starting around 4 o'clock or maybe even earlier. And one last request I need to make, and I wish I didn't have to make this request, but Coalition for Clean Air is a small nonprofit public interest organization. We have a small staff who, even before this crisis, had way too much to do and not enough time to do it. So because of this, we ask that you not email us individually to ask, us to answer your questions or provide you advice. We just don't have the ability to handle all that email. As you might suspect, it's been a bit overwhelming for us. So we will post information on our website, and we will encourage you to rely on that. If you email us, you probably aren't going to get a response. And I apologize for that, but there are just limits to how much that we can do. So that is it for the housekeeping items. I'm excited about getting going, and I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, DTSC Director Katie Butler, who I've known for many, many years from her days at LA County Department of Public Health and the consistent stream of more important job assignments she's gotten until, I think it was last October, the governor appointed her to be the director of the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, which we refer to as DTSC. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lyou. Thank you to you and the whole team at Coalition for Clean Air. You're a small but mighty team, so thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to share information that I hope you all find helpful. It really is a pleasure to be with you during these difficult times. And my professional background, as Dr. Lyou mentioned, is rooted in public health and environmental disaster response, particularly in Los Angeles County, where I spent a good part of my career working for the LA County Health Department. So the destruction we're experiencing in Los Angeles is unprecedented. I share the gratitude that Dr. Lyou mentioned for our first responders, and my deepest sympathies go out to all of you who lost loved ones or know someone who lost their life. Our department is staffed with experts in fire recovery, and so I'm sure it's no surprise to hear that their workload responding to these fires increases year after year. But never before have our teams seen this scale of destruction in such a short amount of time. So in public service, we are all being called to meet the moment, to be innovative, think outside the box, work efficiently and collaboratively with our agency partners so that we really can serve the community to the best of our ability. Fortunately for those of us who are drawn to emergency response, collaboration is at the heart of what we do. So I appreciate that that's also the spirit of this webinar, bringing us experts together. So in the short time we have together today, I'm going to highlight DTSC's role in the recovery efforts, provide an overview of the debris removal activities, and talk a little bit about how to stay safe from the ash and the debris. So we're mission tasked by lead agencies in these kinds of emergencies. And DTSC is often mission tasked with what we refer to as phase one of the debris removal. So just last year alone, DTSC was mission tasked with phase one recovery activities for 6 wildfire incidents across the state. We removed household hazardous waste and materials from over 1,000 properties. In 2018, when the Camp Fire devastated the town of Paradise in Butte County, our department, DTSC, worked with US EPA to assess and remove household hazardous waste from over 13,000 properties that suffered damage from the fire. So it's really this strong collaboration across all levels of government, the county, the state, and US EPA, in that instance of the Camp Fire, that resulted in a successful first phase of the cleanup. So we did learn a lot from that 2018 fire, and bring those tools to bear today as we're responding to the LA wildfire recovery. So in this case, US EPA is the lead organization for the LA wildfire debris removal process. And we are working hand in hand with US EPA for phase one. Our teams are in the field now, surveying and assessing the hazardous waste and materials that we're going to be removing from the properties. So every recovery effort is unique. There's vast differences in the regions, in the terrain, weather conditions, the way neighborhoods are designed and allow access for our teams. So we track data from incident to incident, and that helps us understand how to continually, improve and respond better, more efficiently every time. But really, it's unrealistic to compare one mission to another. That being said, I think I can safely speak for all of our government agencies involved that we are committed to getting people back into their properties and begin that important process of rebuilding. I'm going to pivot to how the debris removal works in a little bit more detail and what to expect as it relates to the LA wildfire recovery. The purpose of debris removal, first and foremost, is to protect humans, wildlife, and environment from any hazardous materials and trees resulting from the fire damage. And it's really done in 2 phases. So in the first phase, crews remove visible hazardous materials that are found on top of the ash. And as I mentioned, this can vary from property to property, depending on what the resident stored or used in their home, their garage, and around their property. The types of hazardous materials that we encounter include batteries of all sizes, car batteries, and wall storage batteries, pesticides, propane tank, other compressed gas cylinders. Those can be especially volatile if they were damaged in the fire and are a serious safety concern. Mercury thermostats are often found, asbestos siding, paints, other hazards, like I said, varies from property to property. So this service, the phase one activities, happen automatically. They're conducted at no cost to homeowners at every property where our experts determine there's that need. And the survey work for this phase is already underway. So this first step is really critical to remove hazardous materials that are dangerous to public health and the environment. The special training and the certifications that our crews have ensure that it's done quickly and safely. Our crews, they stay safe by wearing what's called level C personal protective equipment. And this includes boot covers, Tyvek suits, gloves, a respirator, eye protection, and hard hats. So removing all of the visible hazardous waste from properties prevents those contaminants from polluting the environment and protects the public from further exposure. That step clears the way for the second phase. And the second phase of debris removal focuses on removing the fire damaged metal and structural debris. This service is conducted at no cost to eligible homeowners who elect to participate in the program. The debris removal program also looks at the safety of trees, watersheds, and other public lands. So once the debris removal work is complete, an inspection is conducted, and then the local government can clear the property for reuse. DTSC and CalRecycle will have debris removal trackers on our websites. For past incidents, the public has found this very helpful. So the website will show in real time the progress being made property by property. We will be sharing more materials necessary to understand the details of how to sign up for the phase two process. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you, Dr. Lyou, for sharing that recovery website. That will be a constant source of information. So to summarize, phase one is automatic and free to residents. This happens first to remove the hazardous materials immediately dangerous to health and the environment. And then phase two is a program that residents can choose to participate in, and it removes the ash structural debris to clear the way for rebuilding. So I can certainly understand the desire for homeowners and residents to want to go back, inspect their properties for personal items. And the concern that we have as health professionals is that the exposure to the structural debris and the ash can present serious health and safety risks. So the ash is a dangerous mix of metals and other chemicals, and direct contact with this ash, it can cause dermatitis, other kinds of skin irritation, as well as respiratory irritation, exacerbation of asthma. And so children and people with chronic diseases are especially vulnerable to even these immediate health effects that can happen from contact with the ash. So if your property has not yet been cleared for reuse, please use proper health and safety gear while on your property, and please keep an eye out for potential hazards. So thank you. And I'll conclude by saying that I live here in the Los Angeles area with my family, and it has been encouraging to see the community come together uh, to help each other, and just so many volunteers out there helping. And um, you know, we at DTSC will be here for the long haul. It's going to be, we know, a long road to recovery, but we will be doing everything we can to make sure that there's clear information and updates about the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Katie. Um, couldn't agree more with that. I'm going to shift to air quality and talk a bit about that. If if one of the main things to think about in terms of these fires is that there are two different scenarios that you need to consider. And the first is when things are burning, actually burning or smoldering. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the residue once the fires are extinguished, once the fires have been put out. When it comes to active burning, the suggestion that we have, the suggestion that I've seen from the South Coast Air Quality Management District is to check the air quality index. It's called the AQI. You can check that air quality index on the South Coast Air Quality Management District app, mobile phone app, or the website, or you can check the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA Air Now website. Also, after you've checked AQI, you should check to see if you smell smoke or see ash. Um, if you do smell smoke or see ash, you should either move indoors or if you're instructed, you should evacuate. Now, under the second scenario, once the fires are out, you need to deal with the fire residue and be concerned about that. That is less of a regional air quality issue, and it's more of a localized um, thing about the immediate area that you're in. You should minimize your exposure to ash and to smoke at all times. If you have to go to places with debris and ash, you should wear personal protective equipment and take precautionary measures, such as washing off ash that you get on your skin or your hair, being sure not to track ash into otherwise clean areas, and using vacuums with high efficiency particulate filters, such as they're referred to as HEPA filters. You've probably been hearing about those things. Um, all of those things are really important. There are some people who came away from our webinar last week thinking that the AQI was useless. We saw that in social media posts and TikTok videos and things. Um, they said that the AQI was useless when trying to assess the threat from the fires. And I need to make this one really clear and make sure you understand that the air quality index, the AQI, is important and you should use it. It's not the only thing to consider, but it provides important information, especially about regional particulate matter levels that can be very unhealthy or even hazardous when there are fires going on. The AQI will tell you if the regional air quality is good, if it's moderate, if it's unhealthy for sensitive groups, unhealthy for all people, very unhealthy or hazardous. So those different levels that you'll see and different colors associated with that. Sensitive groups include the very young, the very old, and those with health conditions that would make you susceptible to air pollution, like um, asthma or other health conditions, cardiovascular or respiratory health conditions that make you susceptible to air pollution. When you're looking at the AQI, you don't need to overthink it. Pay less attention to the numbers and pay more attention to the color or the category, because they're not necessarily accurate to exactly where you're standing or sitting, but the category can give you a good indication of whether the air is good for you to breathe or not. Um, the AQI doesn't measure toxic chemicals or large particles. Smoke and ash can include both of those. That's why you should minimize your exposure to smoke and ash no matter what the AQI says. Again, if you smell smoke or see ash, take measures to protect yourself. There are also several things that you shouldn't do in these circumstances. The first, and I think it's been repeated a lot, but I want to make sure everyone understands this and follows it. Do not use leaf blowers. Absolutely do not use leaf blowers when there's ash present. Um, and don't do anything that will disturb the ash and put it back up in the air where people and you or others might breathe it. When outdoor air quality is bad, don't use swamp coolers or fans that bring outside air inside. Uh, Make sure that your air conditioning unit or your heating system has clean filters and recirculates indoor air. Uh, Also, don't buy and use air purifiers that generate ozone. A lot of some of them do, and it's very unfortunate. But the good thing to know is that the California Air Resources Board, which we refer to as CARB, on their website, they list CARB certified air cleaning devices. I would recommend that if you're going to purchase an air purifier, that you check the CARB website to make sure that that air purifier is certified as actually having low or no ozone generation associated with it. Um, Again, do not track ash into otherwise clean areas. If you have ash on your shoes, your clothes, take those off before you enter a clean room or building so you don't track it into that building. I'm going to also say that we've had several people ask us if they could hire a contractor to test air quality or areas and soil and areas in their community for toxic chemicals. And unfortunately, I don't have that kind of information or have anyone to recommend for that. When I've dealt with environmental sampling in the past, it's always been done by others. It's been either done by the government agencies who are asking the people who caused the pollution to do the testing, or sometimes those agencies hire their own outside contractors or do the work themselves. But I don't know who those people are or how you would actually go about hiring them. I'm sorry that I can't give you that advice. But if you do find someone to do testing for toxic chemicals, you need to make sure that you know what they should be testing for, and you need to make sure that they do testing right and follow the right protocols, so you get results that you can actually use and depend on. To do this kind of sampling correctly, it's really complicated, and some things are easier to test for than others. One of the reasons you see so many of these low cost PM 2.5 sensors deployed everywhere is because there's a great system using a laser based system to measure that PM 2.5, and there are low cost sensors that have been deployed all over the place. We've deployed more than 200 of them in cooperation with the Los Angeles Unified School District on the Know Your Air network. There are also some tests for other things, and these toxic chemicals, especially the most toxic chemicals such as dioxins, furans, and hexavalent chromium, that is very complicated and very expensive to do. I don't know the exact price, but I remember, experience working on a Superfund site in Maywood called the Pemmico Superfund site, where EPA was paying well north of $10,000 per dioxin furan test. And I know hexavalent chromium. I spent 12 years as the governor's appointee on the South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board. And during that time, there was a discovery of elevated hexavalent chromium levels in the city of Paramount. And my recollection, it was that South Coast AQMD spent $7 million one year testing for hexavalent chromium in the city of Paramount. So, and also, you should know that from a toxicological perspective, it's not clear to me what might present the greatest threat to your health and the health of your family. So it might be the volatile organic chemicals, such as benzene, that presents the greatest threat. You don't know. I don't know. It might be semi-volatile organic chemicals like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are very toxic. They're also known as PAHs, or it might be metals such as lead or mercury. So dioxins, PAHs, and mercury are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic chemicals. We call them PBTs. And these persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals, they stay in the environment for a very long time. And once you're exposed to them, they'll stay in your body for a very long time. And on top of that, they're toxic. So those are the things you need to really worry about, but might not be the thing that's causing the most risk where you are. Polychlorinated biphenyls, referred to as PCBs, are another group of persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals. And if the transformers on the power poles in your community contained PCBs, when they're burned, and some of them do because they haven't been replaced, there may be PCBs in the ash or in the air. And I wish I could tell you which of these threats might be the one to be most concerned about and to do personal testing for. But given that uncertainty, I would recommend that you just take precautions to reduce your exposure to the best of your ability, and really, you know, trust that agencies like DTSC and EPA will go in and provide you the information you need to keep yourself safe. So I'm going to sum up by saying, if you want to know whether you should be worried about what you're breathing, check the air quality index first. Then check if you can smell smoke or see ash. If all of those are good, then you should be okay. If not, take precautionary measures such as going indoors, using an air quality purifier, or leaving the area and getting to a place where the air is better. So that's what I have. Again, when you have your questions, you can post them when we get to the Q&A after we get done with Mark. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mark Gold, another friend and colleague who I've known for more decades than I'd care to remember. Most of you know Mark from may know Mark from the many almost 20 years, right, as the executive director of Heal the Bay. He's now at Natural Resources Defense Council and an adjunct professor at UCLA for the Institute of the Environment. And so, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Greatly appreciate that, and definitely great to hear all this information being made available to the public. I know Joe already said this in the beginning, but I'm one of these people who have lived my entire life here, and to see what has happened to two extraordinary communities in the Palisades and Altadena, and so many friends that have lost everything. I mean, it's just beyond heart-wrenching. And so I also want to thank all those people who are volunteering right now. So not just the first responders, but the thousands and thousands of people who have been just generously giving their time, money, resources, et cetera, for that. So for me, there's a bit of a struggle to talk about the water issue because, in comparison to loss of life and property, it's just not in the same in the same breath. And so, but I'll jump into it. And on the drinking water side, which is where I'm going to start, which is not my biggest area of expertise, but I do happen to sit on the Metropolitan Water District Board, representing the city of Santa Monica, and have worked a little bit in this field for 30 years. But I'm mostly going to talk about what other folks have done in this arena. First of all, I hope everybody who lives in these areas, there's 8 different water districts that have warnings right now about your drinking water. And so, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't been able to find, there's no perfect map that shows you where all these warnings are. But the bottom line is, if you're in one of those areas, I mean, double check. And the districts, I see Kinaloa Irrigation District, I think just lifted their do not drink water order. But then you have, this is the Altadena area, you have Las Flores Water Company, Lincoln Water Company, Pasadena Water and Power, and Rubio Canyon Land and Water Association. And I would just strongly urge you to check with your water purveyor on what the latest is on on drinking water. And for me to speculate would be irresponsible. And so just get the information from the source, from who you're paying your water bill on. In the city of LA, obviously it's LADWP, and that's the 90272 area, so the Pacific Palisades zip code. It's also a teeny bit of 90402. There's a tiny part of Santa Monica that actually gets LADWP water north of San Vicente, and so they would be in that category of not drinking the water, where you absolutely should not be doing that or using the water, frankly, for any purpose is my advice from a precautionary perspective, and I'll get into that in a second. And then part of LA County Water District number 29 and LA County Water District number 21. So that's Cagle Canyon. I think they had a cancellation of their notice, so you might want to double check there. And up in Malibu, there's still those warnings are active. So, but again, double check on what the latest is there. So you had a speaker last time, incredibly brilliant researcher, in Gina Solomon. She's at the Public Health Institute. She also used to be at NRDC. She used to be at the state of California. And you know, almost right when she went from the state and started working for the Public Health Institute and working with UCSF in response to the campfires, a series of studies were initiated on what happens in a fire to drinking water quality, because it's not usually the first thing you think of. You think of what Joe was talking about, or you think of what Katie was talking about, which is all the toxics on your site, or what am I breathing in the air. You don't generally think about the drinking water side of this. And what they found was, in a number of these studies, was that you get backflow of smoke and polluted air into the drinking water system, um, uh, when especially when you have pressure lines. And you've heard a lot of speculation on what some of the biggest issues were on water and water supply and putting out the fires. And it's not a supply issue. I can tell you, as a Metropolitan Water District member, we had a record volume of water in storage, 3.8 million acre feet right now in storage. It's a water pressure issue, depending on where you live. And could that water pressure be maintained at, 40 pounds per square inch for, hours and hours and hours on end, was really more the issue. But as you can imagine, when you lose that pressure with all the burnt structures, a lot of the pipelines end up, are made out of PVC, vinyl chloride, or high density polyethylene, and they can melt. And so A, not maintaining pressure, B, contributing potentially additional toxics into the drinking water system that wouldn't be there normally. And so what Dr. Solomon found was high concentrations of BTEX, so that's benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. Benzene is what you hear about the most, but also included the semi-volatiles as well, a number of other constituents, which I'll get into as well as volatile organic compounds. And so I one of the things, in just sort of going to that and talking about some of the specificity of our work, is that the list of semi-volatile organic compounds could include indene, naphthalene, styrene, phenols, and then a lot of methylene chloride is another compound, which is more of a volatile, that often can be found here. The point is not for you to remember all of these compounds, but realize that many of these are probable human carcinogens. And so, the reason why the water is being shut off in those areas in a more precautionary manner is just to really try to manage that risk and not put anybody needlessly exposed. to toxics here. And so, there's a lot of people who live in places that get water there that did not lose their homes. And so if you have those don't drink the water warnings, I mean, I can't urge you strongly enough to really pay heed to them, um, and um, and and to really, from the standpoint of protection, I would even go so far as to say I wouldn't be using the water for any purpose at this point until you get a clean bill of health from your water purveyor that the water lines are safe. And even then, some of the recommendations that occur after that, just to make sure, is you're gonna want to purge your water lines. Turn on your faucets for 10 minutes. Clean out your ice maker and clean all the water lines and everything you have. Just purge it out a bit to make sure that there's just no risk moving forward when you start using the water for consumption and for bathing and for cleaning clothes and all these other sorts of things. Now, a lot of these, in the work that Gina did, it's the service lines, which are the individual lines, the water lines that go to your structures. So the burnt structures, they're generally shallower in the soils. And so, as you can imagine, during these extremely high temperature wildfires, much higher risk of, in essence, melting or volatilizing out the PVC and polyethylene lines. And so that was what was found in the studies. There was also a professor, losing her name here, not Draper. I'll hit it in a second. From Oregon State, who's been doing work on really what constituents one sees when one burns HDPE or exposes HDPE or PVC pipe, and what sort of contaminants that you see. And so that list of contaminants was something that was actually pretty critical to how the work was done by Gina and others on the campfire. And so there's a lot of people who really just started. There's a relatively new field. Erica Fisher is her name at Oregon State. But it's a relatively new field, really looking at the sorts of toxics that one would see would ending up in your water distribution system, and really potentially posing a health risk that should be avoided. So hopefully that overview is somewhat helpful. But again, if you're more interested in it, and sorry, I don't have the links, maybe someone can find them. But environmental science and technology, Dr. Solomon did. There's 3 or 4 papers on this issue that you might want to take a look at if you're interested in these issues. So I'm going to jump from drinking water. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing, which is that, keep checking, like I said, with the water district that you're under. And, right now, I don't know if there's sort of a universal standardized, hey, if there's 5 straight tests in 5 consecutive days, then we have a clean bill of health, and please go back to, feel free to go back to your property. And so that's not really clear on how that determination is made. And so that you may also want to talk to your water district there from the standpoint of how do they determine when these warnings are lifted? Because that's, I think, important for you to know and gives you peace of mind, when they actually do get lifted. But again, still purge your faucets and the like. All right, so shifting over to polluted runoff issues. And so, again, the issue, now we're talking about different sorts of health risks, probably not nearly as concerning as drinking contaminated water here. So I just want to make sure from an exposure perspective, people understand what I'm talking about now and shifting. But I do understand that a lot of people deeply care about the environment, or swim or surf in the bay on Santa Monica Bay or San Pedro Bay on a regular basis. And so both watersheds will be impacted in a pretty significant way. So runoff, obviously, we're talking about rivers and creeks and beaches and bays, Santa Monica Bay and San Pedro Bay. Talking about Palisades first, in the areas that were burned in the Palisades, there are 4 different major storm drains in the Palisades area. There's Santa Monica Canyon, there's Temescal Canyon, there's Pulga, and Santa Ynez at Sunset. I bring those up in particular because those are some of the drains that actually have low flow diversions, that are used in dry weather to actually divert runoff from the most polluted beaches into the coastal intercept sewer, which then goes to the Hyperion treatment plant down in the Playa del Rey area. And what the city and the county are going to attempt to do with this potentially first rain. I mean, this is just extraordinary, everybody. And one of the biggest reasons we're in this situation is we've had 16 100ths of an inch of rain since May 5th of last year. I mean, it's just second driest period on record, maybe the driest 8-month period on record in the history of the region. 1963 was the one comparison there. But in essence, there's been no measurable rain for 8 months. And so that's why the entire Southern California area is just a tinderbox at this time, because we've just had no rain at all. So it's not an issue of wildfire risk when you have, just multiple years of drought. You can have this in a short period after 2 wet years, which is what we just had. And you can imagine all the fuel that built up with 2 wet years in a row. And then all of that desiccates and dries out. And, just a spark can lead to this disaster. So I just bring that up sort of for context in really how things are right now. So not only is there everything that's coming off the burn area, but we haven't had the first flush of the rainy season at all. So that just means all the pollution that normally would build up over time is also going to get washed into these water bodies, and whether that's the LA River or Santa Monica Bay or San Gabriel River or San Pedro Bay, et cetera, et cetera. But getting back to the Palisades, so the attempt from the city of LA and LA County, they're working together to try to figure out if they can divert the first flush of the coming rains, so that most toxic slug of runoff will go into the sewer system and into Hyperion, where it can get treated and then discharged 5 miles offshore after treatment, Hyperion treatment plant, rather than just going right across our beaches and into the bay. This isn't easy to do because these are dry weather runoff diversions. So you can imagine you have to protect the intakes from debris, which is going to be pretty difficult. Ideally, some of the cleanup in some of these areas, these drainages has started in earnest, that Katie talked about. So that would help, obviously, in reducing a lot of the issues there. The city and the county have to work very hard in doing erosion and sediment control. You can imagine all these burnt hillsides and the like. The risk of really high sediment loads is very, very high. And that's something that could be problematic as well. And so what's going to happen is, in other areas I think people should be aware of, in Santa Monica Bay, are Topanga in particular is very vulnerable. Just tragic what's happened to the lower Topanga watershed. And you have all sorts of sensitive and endangered species like the southern steelhead and the western pond turtle that are there, that are hugely concerning. on their vulnerability. You have Big Rock, burned a lot as well, and then Rambla Pacifico is just examples. So that whole Las Flores area, et cetera, that is also burned. So what do we generally see in the runoff in these sorts of situations? You can see toxic heavy metals, much at elevated concentrations. You've already heard Joe talk about PCBs. That's a possibility. PAHs, polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons. Fecal indicator bacteria generally goes through the roof as well on these first flushes. And then in firefighting and whenever you have large burns, as you can imagine, the nutrient levels, both nitrogen and phosphorus, spike incredibly high. And so those are the sorts of contaminants that we're talking about. The Regional Water Quality Control Board, working with the city and the county, is going to monitor this first flush, both doing beach monitoring as well as outfall monitoring in a number of different locations during this rain. The state, the Ocean Protection Council, has generously, very quickly given $200,000 to get some of this monitoring up and going. So that's going to happen starting with the rain. Hopefully, everybody's ready to go with the rain this weekend. And then, very surprisingly, and you'll hear more about this coming up, is Scripps and NOAA have Cal Coffee, which is the oldest, most robust ocean monitoring program in the world. 75 years and counting. Coincidentally, they were doing a monitoring cruise during the fires and were finding ash up to 100 miles offshore from the fire. And so so they'll be able to analyze some of those samples in the months ahead on what were they actually finding in the ocean, literally miles and miles and miles offshore. So that's a gross overview of what's going on. And clearly, there won't be enough action to really reduce the impacts of these flows to the beaches and the ocean, by this weekend. But again, and I'm trying to be precautionary, just as I was on the drinking water side. If you're a surfer, if you're a swimmer, when it rains, I've been telling people don't swim within 3 days after a rain for, 30 plus years. And I'm going to throw a number out there that's probably going to scare some people on here. I honestly, in those areas where I named those the biggest concerns, I would swim within 3 weeks of a rain coming out of those drains in the Palisades to South Malibu area. And so there's just too many variables there that would be concerning. And it's not like when you have a rain, those drains and those creeks stop flowing. They're going to keep flowing for a while. And so that's just a word of caution there. And with that, like everyone else, be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Can we open up the Q&A so that people can ask questions now? I don't even know if that's Jordan or Nicole or who all's going to be doing that. I know we're going to be doing that, and let us know when you do. Okay, so those are questions. Questions are open. So if you have questions, please post them, and we will. And they're coming in fast and furious, and we'll get to them as fast as we can. It's quite a stretch for Coalition for Clean Air to talk about water quality issues. But Mark, thank you. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. It's really great to know these things. Katie, was there anything you wanted to add before we start getting into the questions?
No, I think, yeah, I really enjoyed that last segment and learned a lot. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Again, if you see a question that you wanted to ask or that you find particularly important, use the promotion, the thumbs up to promote that one so that it comes to the top of the list. And Jordan is now sending us to is that a question there, Jordan? It goes on for quite a bit.
Oh my God, is this 75 questions at this point? Is that where we're at?
Yes.
Okay, so did you want us, Joe, to
No,
come by?
Jordan will post the questions in the chat for us to take a look at, the ones that are most promoted.
Okay.
And and
I was
let's
just
just
wondering if you wanted us to try to type some answers. That's all.
no, no, no. Don't worry about that because we won't have
Okay.
time to get through. Obviously, we've got 90, almost 100 questions in just a couple of minutes here. So last webinar, the panel pointed to the inevitable toxins, all due to the quality of burnt, AQI, VOCs, heavy metals, synthetic chemicals, PCBs, asbestos, PHS, PBTs. Do you know of any group who's accurately measuring these toxins? And no, I don't. Katie, do you know who might be doing measurements?
Yeah, I can speak to the status of this from the government's agency side of things. So earlier this week, California EPA established an environmental health work group consisting of multiple agencies, including South Coast, our Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, also called OEHA, CARB, the Air Board, and others. And that group is looking at resources we already have, things that we may need to establish an air monitoring network that can be shared publicly. So it's not running yet, but we do have agency experts working on it now.
Okay.
And I think during phase 2, that phase of the debris removal is the most invasive as well, where we have bulldozers, heavy machinery, removing the layer of ash from properties. So that work group will be focused on establishing an air monitoring network for the purposes of debris removal. But I certainly understand there's a lot of concerns now. I mean, we still have smoke in many areas of the county from ongoing fires.
Okay, great. I'm glad to know. And if we can, when we figure that out, we'll post it on our resources page on our ccr.org. But I imagine that type of information would also be on the recovery lacounty.gov site too. The other part of the question was, is there a range of distance from the fires that these do not travel? Well, as Mark just told us, I mean, they were seeing ash 100 miles offshore. Um, there's a difference between how far it can travel and whether or not you really have to be concerned about it. Now, the entire basin, after the Eaton fire began and the wind was blowing down south, so the entire Los Angeles basin basically got a good coat of ash that the first day or two. But if you no longer see ash in your community and you've checked the AQI, you're not smelling smoke, you're not seeing ash, and the AQI says that the air is either clean or moderate, I personally, I wouldn't worry too much about that where you are at that time. If the AQI is, comes back up again, we've actually had kind of freakishly clean air in some ways most recently. But if the AQI shows that the air is bad, or if you smell smoke or see ash, then you would then take measures to go indoors and not exercise outdoors, and do not engage in vigorous activities, and try to run your air purifier if you have one. So that's how I think is the best advice I've come across, and how I'm personally doing it. I'm fortunate not to live in a place that had anything other than a small coating of ash. Once the Eaton fire started, but no longer seeing it in my community. So I'm back exercising again outdoors. So do we have other questions? Did you post any more in here, folks? Okay. And Mark and Katie, you can read these too if I'm not getting to them as fast enough.
We're gonna say so far they're pretty much your two. I haven't seen a water question.
Okay. Again, that's the bias of having Coalition for Clean Air people on this. We do find water important, Mark, but we'll get to it, I'm sure. Okay,
Yeah, no
so
hurry. I'm just saying they're all asking like, should
yeah,
I wear a mask? Should my kids
right,
go out and play? All that stuff.
yeah, um,
I do see a question about timing. That's, I can certainly understand that we all want to know, okay, how long will this debris removal take, right? Both
mhm.
phases. And it's really difficult to estimate a time. I can give you some examples of past incidents. So for Woolsey Fire, there were approximately 1,600 structures damaged there. It took at least a year for phase 1 and 2 to be complete. The campfires that we talked about, the structures damaged, that count was a little bit more comparable. There were 16,000 structures damaged in campfire. Our department with US EPA completed phase 1 in less than 9 weeks for that. And then phase 2, I don't know how long phase 2 took for campfire, but again, it can go up to, at least a year time for both phases to be complete.
Yeah, and I think, generally, as long as there is ash that you see on the ground, or you are in communities that have ash, you need to be careful, and you need to take precautionary measures and try to protect yourself from it. So is it permanent? Well, to the degree that the ash continues to be there, yes. Once it's cleaned up, you have less to worry about. And I see this comment about what happened in the last meeting, where the comment was this is going to linger for years. I mean, to some degree, at least some of these chemicals don't go away, but it's also a matter of degree, and a matter of potential exposure. I hate to tell people this, but I do tell them that, whenever you're cooking meat, frying bacon, cooking a steak, you are creating polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons by burning the fat, and you're probably breathing some of those, which you shouldn't be. But we take those risks, and some of those, us who know about it, take those risks knowingly. And as long as you're not breathing that air all the time, you're probably not exposed at a level that's going to have an adverse impact on your health. Can't guarantee it, but some of these risks are, unavoidable. What we're trying to let people know is that there are risks, and that you should avoid them to the extent that you can. And there will be, I would assume, the type of studies that Gina Solomon did, and other studies that others will be doing in the air, on the soil, and in the water, and some of those will take a long time to get results, but we will have more information at some point about this, and we'll be able to take even more protective measures. Someone lives within a mile radius of 23,000-acre burn site. Is it safe for kids to play outside without a mask while phase 1 or 2 cleanup's going? That's a very hard question. Katie, I'm not sure if you can answer that either.
I think that's where the data from the air monitoring is really going to be needed, and we'll have to use that air monitoring data once phase 2 especially is underway in earnest, and use that data to inform.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch in this. I mean, one is proximity, two is the size of the fire damage, and three is the fact that it's kids, right? So all of those things have to be taken into account.
In the direction
uh,
of the wind.
and the direction of the wind, right? And where it was. And the first day with the Pacific Palisades fire, the wind was blowing toward the west, and I mean, I could see it from my house blowing out into the ocean, and I could also see from based off wind maps, where it was blowing, and off the PM 2.5 sensors throughout the basin, that it wasn't blowing across the basin. We were very fortunate. The next day, though, when the Eaton fire started and the wind was blowing to the west and southwest, you could also see on that network of PM sensors that it covered the entire basin, and all the way through Long Beach out to Catalina. So
We didn't really get ash of any significance, Joe. I live about 2 miles from the Palisades fire, and in Santa Monica, and that was like day 3 of the
yeah,
fires, right? When the winds
yeah.
really died down is when we started getting ash.
Hmm.
I do see the one on rain, and yeah, whenever it rains, air quality is going to improve dramatically. So there's no question about that. So that'll be welcome. But a lot of what Katie and Joe have been talking about are what happens when you start having cleanup and you start kicking up stuff again, and much more localized exposures that would be of concern. Is it safe to drink, wash my dishes, and shower with the water in areas that do not have do not drink orders? Is there any way to test for the specific chemicals released from burning homes? Um, uh, those are great questions. I'm gonna go to what I said before. It's just not worth the risk. And so it doesn't mean that there's going to be a major health risk from first of all, anything to do with washing dishes, I would definitely not do because then you're talking about direct consumption. But there I've seen different um, responses to the can I take a shower? And to me, enough of these chemicals are can volatilize when you have hot water. I just don't think it's worth it. And
What about
so
in the do not drink area? And not in the do not drink areas, but in the places that don't have those orders.
with that oh, do not. Oh, then yeah, don't
Yeah.
worry about it. Yeah, do whatever.
Don't worry about
Sorry, I misread
it. Then
that.
you're
Reading
good.
myself
You're
quickly.
good. Okay.
My mistake. Yeah, if there's a do not drink, if there is not, sorry, double negatives are tough.
Yeah.
If there's not a do not drink order, then don't worry about it at all. The water's going to be high quality and no concern. It's those gray areas where you didn't have, where it looks like everything's kind of okay and all you have is a little smoke issue, but you still have do not drink orders. The reality is the water's not to be trusted in that area until that warning gets lifted. And so, sorry if I was confusing on that at all. But that's what you should be concerned about.
That's okay. I was looking at it. Wait, that is double negative there. So
Yeah,
thanks, Mark. And I know you're a person who drinks the tap water, right?
I am.
You are. Okay.
And my wife works for City of Santa Monica Water, so we live and drink it daily.
Good. Good for you. Let's see. I'm trying to read this one on the fly. I'm hearing is destruction is unprecedented. These byproducts are present in the air. We are not measuring them because it's expensive. Are there any plans to measure these? We think that there are. We don't know the specifics. Um, they're not necessarily continuing in the air for long periods of time. I mean, after days, these will fall out of the air, and a lot of them will be attached to the particles that we're measuring. And when we see very low particle counts, that means that those toxic chemicals are not in the air either, at least not to a degree. I mean, we always have toxic chemicals in our air. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. And South Coast Air Quality Management District has done a series of studies called the Multiple Air Toxics Exposure Studies that measures background levels of air toxics. Sometimes they found things they weren't looking for, like hexavalent chromium in Riverside one time, and styrene in Anaheim one time, and then they had to pinpoint where that was coming from, and they dealt with it. But there are background levels of benzene and other air toxics. And you can look at those studies by the South Coast Air Quality Management District, the MATE studies, on their website. And there's another one they're working on to update it yet again. And it shows that there are background levels of air toxics that we all breathe every day, but we live in an industrialized area, urban area, and that's to be expected because we have a lot of combustion going on. Whether or not those are higher than the normal background, I don't think it's been measured yet. Not that I know of. We're hoping that it does happen and that we'll have some information about that, but I just don't know of anything that's been measured. Some of them are expensive, not all of them to do. I mean, well, relatively expensive. Some are more expensive than others and more difficult than others. For example, that hexavalent chromium, when you're taking samples, air quality samples of hexavalent chromium, it has to be handled in a particular way and it has to be measured in a particular way that is different from other measurements. And it's really hard to do right and very expensive and takes time. So that's what I'm trying to get across to people. It's further information you can provide around these carcinogens, how far they travel from burn sites, how long will they last. I would assume that they travel as far as this smoke and ash, but I don't know that for sure. And if you want to know more about air toxics, I would recommend reading those South Coast Air Quality Management District studies. Um,
Next one's for
so
Katie.
Someone talking about,
I
go
was
ahead.
driving on the freeway in Pasadena the other day and saw 3 trucks carrying burnt cars. They weren't covered in any way, and the ash was flying off the cars. Is this, oh, sorry. Is this what we should expect during cleanup, or should they be taking extra precautions? Okay, so this is where I'm going to give you our complaint line to make sure that haulers, everyone, being, involved in the removal are following protocols. So I can drop that in the chat because, we can respond to anything that you see like that. And then I will take this report itself back to our team, and we do have very specific rules and regulations for transportation. What you probably saw was the metal frames, and along with other scrap metal, we do try to recycle as much as that metal debris as we possibly can if it doesn't contain the hazardous materials or any kind of like lithium battery inside. That's dealt with separately. But you're absolutely right. It should be more controlled. So thank you for raising that, and I'll drop the complaint line in the chat.
Thanks, Katie. How long should we continue to wear masks outside? Weeks, months, years to come? Uh, you, if the AQI shows that the particle levels are low or moderate, if you're not um, seeing ash or smelling smoke, wearing a mask is up to you. I mean, all of us went through COVID and understand that wearing these masks can protect you from a lot of things, including the things that, cause colds and prevent you from spreading your cold to other people. So whether you wear a mask or not, and want to be, how cautious you want to be is up to you.
Thanks for asking
Person,
about fire, though.
yeah, but if there's fire, active fires and active soot, and you can smell the smoke and you do see the ash, then you should be wearing at least an N95, well-fitting N95 mask, and trying to minimize your exposure to that air. Sandboxes, I don't know, Katie, if you guys are anyone's measuring it. I assume that there are some concerns about whether there has been fallout in sandboxes in the heavily impacted areas.
You haven't heard
Yeah,
anything from the schools, Joe?
Not on sandboxes. I've learned a lot about what LAUSD is doing, and really remarkable efforts to clean up schools. I mean, deep cleaning of schools, checking of filters, replacing of filters. I was telling people that not a lot of good came out of the COVID pandemic, but LAUSD upgraded their heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems in every school and every indoor space to at least what's called a MERV 13 filter or better. And those are very good filters and would filter out particles very effectively. So I do know a little bit about what LAUSD is doing. I don't know about other schools, and I don't know about sandboxes.
yeah. For the schools that are in the footprint of the burn scar, we deal with those for phase 1 and 2. But I imagine this concern also extends to schools that are close by. And so I will check with our team on this because if there is concern that there's a large amount of ash, then we have teams that can do some sampling.
And Mark, there's a question here about someone who has a well on their property. And I know that some people and very small water purveyors of I forget the number of might not be held to the same standards as the large ones. Are there anything you can do to help people who are maybe using water from a well on their own property? Oh,
They're kind of on their own. But they could at least talk to LA County Public Works, the LA County Waterworks District number 29. Um, on the creek side, on the water quality side, or just, the health of the creek. I mean, you've got the Resource Conservation District up there that, Clark Stevens and his crew that do amazing work. That are probably worth talking to. You also have the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. So there's a lot of folks who do work there that could be helpful on the creek, but it's not. Yeah, if you have a well, unfortunately, it ends up being your own issue to deal with, unfortunately.
And what about the people who don't know who their water district is? I mean, I can imagine renters whose landlords pay the water bills might not ever see a water bill and or know who's providing their water. How do you figure that out?
I'm not sure this is the best website, but the water alerts are the Water for LA, which is the LA County Department of Public Works website called Water for LA. Hopefully, one of your staff can sort of find it, but they have the water notices, and so you can sort of click on each of the water service providers and look at their latest notice, but also you can look up what their the boundary is of each of those districts to see if you live within those areas. I wish it was easy just to let people know how crazy our water management is. We have like 250 different agencies that manage water in LA County, which is absolutely insane.
I'm glad I'm not in your business. Uh, where can we find information about historical soil testing in Arroyo Seco and Pasadena Parks to use as benchmarks against future testing post burn? I don't know of any. There may be some. I mean, DTSC and the regional water quality control boards sometimes have sites where they do testing and they determine what background levels look like, but I'm not sure about those specific areas. You have databases. You still have Epic or whatever. What is it at DTSC now?
Yeah, we have
That's right.
envirostore.dtsc.ca.gov that hosts all of our sampling data, soil, groundwater from any site that's been investigated. Uh, that doesn't always have uncontaminated results, so it would take some digging through there. Um, Sometimes what we do though to determine like a background or uncontaminated level um, is just go a little bit further to depth because the ash typically does, you know, fall, settle, not really go too far beyond the top 6 to 9 inches. So at depth, we know that's not impacted or much less impacted. So we can use that as a comparison as well.
And Mark, do you see Gilda's question here? Is it possible that for contaminated
Yeah.
water from these other areas get into different areas?
Um, so Palisades getting to like West Hollywood or Santa Monica, the answer is absolutely no. Santa Monica, our systems aren't even really very connected, which is another issue. But it's because of a lot of the distribution system is pressurized, and so the contaminants would have to go against pressure. It's just not. That's not going to happen. So the good news is that's not something that people need to worry about. I know less about the Altadena system because there's like 6 water districts or something that are involved there. But I would assume it's pretty similar in that regard, in that the water agencies are so careful about this in particular. We've talked about it at Metropolitan Water District multiple times since the fires have started, and they have a ton of crew have been helping out all these water districts. And so I doubt that you're going to see any sort of backflow into areas that have clean water now. I can't say 100% it's not possible, but as close as I can say it 100%, I would feel that way. Do you want me to do the next one?
Sure.
Can all these toxics be fully removed from the water system after rains and once toxic waste starts getting removed and put into landfill and toxins filter into the earth and water long term? What is the realistic time frame for dissipation? Yeah, this is Rosie, that's a great question on removing from the water system. we will know that a lot better because the monitoring of the water system is going to be a lot more robust. And not wanting to provide any of the customers with polluted water and being careful on when you reopen. So there's going to be a lot of in the recovery side here of putting in new water distribution infrastructure in the areas that were burned. And so that's a lot of the areas that were severely burned, the water infrastructure could be beyond repair. And so those sorts of assessments are going to be really high priorities for the water districts, DWP, et cetera, in the weeks and months ahead on what needs to be replaced versus what can be repaired, and the like. And testing will be a big part of it. As you already heard from Joe, and I think Katie as well, some of these contaminants do not break down quickly. I mean, you got toxic metals in the soil. They're going to be toxic metals in the soil until the soil's removed. And so that ends up being a real problem. Some of it, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Some of it will, some of these organics will volatilize off slowly. Some of them will biodegrade slowly over time, and some of them will be washed into our rivers and into our bays, and so that is going to be where your dissipation occurs, but that's certainly not how we want it to occur from an environmental perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, we just need to be aware and careful and hope and demand that the testing be done, and we be rigorous about making sure it is done and we understand what's going on. I know that, for example, lead doesn't really move once it gets deposited on soil. It can stay there for a very, very, very long time and move an inch in 100 years. So some of it, it depends what it is, where it goes, and other things move really quickly and get everywhere, and so it just really depends. Should we be concerned about NO2 in the air? It seems if it seems it is measured in AccuWeather's air quality assessment. So the air quality appears poor even when good on Air Now and Purple Air. I would say that I would look at Air Now and the South Coast AQMD app or website with regard to what the AQI is. NO2 is an air pollutant we are concerned about, and it can have some localized effects at high levels when people are breathing it, but it's also a precursor to smog, oxides of nitrogen generally, mostly including NO2, nitrogen oxide. And that's more, we have, as I explained on the last webinar, we have two smog seasons here in Los Angeles. During the winter, we have a lower temperature inversion layer, and we have less wind, and we have a higher concentration of particles. So in the winter, we tend to have particle pollution in Los Angeles, and in the summer we have sunlight and the mixing of chemicals like oxides of nitrogen and sulfur oxide to create a smog with sunshine, and then we have a smog season in the summer when things are hotter. So uh, yes and no. It's not the most important thing to be measuring, but it is a pollutant that you can and should pay attention to. But I would rely on the AQI index first and foremost when looking at more regional air quality issues. Belongings, clothes, electronics, and other things, toxic chemicals like asbestos, lead getting into the fibers and other stuff. Yeah, it's a hard call.
Is,
I don't
is the
know, Kate,
assumption of the person who's asking that they were in an area that was burned?
or yeah, or heavily, right, heavily impacted, right? You went home and all your clothes smell like smoke, or you have,
Yeah, so
you
to
know,
me those are different things with sort of just trying to figure out what the right answer is there because it's not a it really depends on, or do you have all sorts of smoke problems, or did you actually have a burn issue in your area, or are you just worried because you're, 2 miles away from the burn zone or something? In which case, don't get rid of anything.
yeah.
What are
Uh,
your thoughts there? I'm sure
Katie, do
that's a
you have thoughts about that? What people should do if they return
Yeah,
home?
Yeah. So it does depend on the situation, like Mark's saying, right? So if a home is, damaged, maybe there's some partial damage and you could have some impacts to belongings. I want to go back to one of the most important things is just make sure that if you smell gas or any kind of like gas lines or utility line, those are the first things to, if you smell natural gas, you hear hissing sounds, there's visible damage, like that's when you leave and call the fire department. When you're talking about your personal belongings, um, if you suspect like there's some ash or you see visible ash on your belongings, um, and things that have porous surfaces, those will be more difficult to clean. So it's going to have to be a judgment call on what it is. The things with smooth surfaces, metal, like your white goods, your appliances, electronics that you're mentioning, those should be able to be reasonably, if they're still intact and there's no damage, reasonably cleaned with a wet wipe, making sure that you're using a wet wipe to clean those materials as safely as possible.
Thanks, Katie. Should we be concerned the schools are opening too quickly? Well, and that's another one that's hard to know. Like I said, I'm not sure about Pasadena, Altadena. I do know that LAUSD has been working around the clock on weekends, every day, nights, to clean and deep clean all their schools and to make individual calls at each school. And they have these very advanced filtration systems that are probably better than the filtration system that you have in your home. But again, it's a tough call, and I know LAUSD is being very flexible about allowing people to transfer to different types of school situations and to participate remotely. I'm not sure about Pasadena and Altadena. I will tell you that yesterday I came across I believe it was a city council meeting where FEMA and LA County Department of Public Health and everyone else that you could think of was presenting to the council, town council in Altadena. And there's a long multi-hour video that they have on their website that you can watch and listen to what they're doing. I can't remember if the schools appeared. I think they might have, and you can get updates. I'm sure that the schools are going to try to be as transparent and open and welcoming of questions as possible. It's not bad to question, these are your children, whether or not it's too soon to get back in. But I would, if it were me and if it were my children, I would just try to make sure that, the schools have done everything they possibly can to make sure that all the surfaces have been cleaned, that there isn't the presence of continued presence of ash in the school, and especially indoors, and that they have checked and replaced filters in their HVAC system. But it's, you need to ask those questions and then make your own decision about that. It's not an easy one if you're in one of those highly impacted areas. Um, a reverse osmosis question, that's got to be for you, Mark.
Well, that'll be the easiest one I think we answered today. So the answer is yes. Very good for removing everything from metals to benzene, toluene, etc. So RO is very good for that.
Yeah, a question about veggies, meats, eggs, and farmers market things. Um, Interesting. I got an email from someone who had forwarded me a very long PowerPoint about measurements after, I want to say it was the Tubbs fire, on vegetables, and the findings were encouraging. I think that, there needs to be testing done. I don't know, and I can't make a recommendation based off that, but uh, there are at least some studies that were encouraging about that. They found some toxics, but not as many as you would expect. And some of the things were actually very safe to eat. But again, without there being studies done and measurements taken, it's hard to give you
Mhm.
assurances. I wish I could.
Mhm.
Katie, you
Yeah,
have
and I'll just add to that. I'm not aware of any specific impacts, but it is a good question and something to be mindful of. So generally speaking, though, fruit trees, they have little uptake of, metals, for example, or there are some good studies out there on fruit trees. Things, if you are concerned about this, leafy green vegetables, the things that grow above ground,
Would be more of an
those
issue.
would be the most susceptible if there is an issue here.
I had a toxicologist, I think it was a DTSE toxicologist, tell me decades ago that I would not want to see the chemical results of measurements taken from a rotting orange. It's probably true. um, okay, we do need to wrap up because I promised you guys I'd let you go at 4:30. If I just thank you to everyone. Amazing questions, great questions, and I wish we could have gotten to all million of them that you asked, and I'm sorry that we couldn't. But thank you so much for joining us. And I think Jordan's going to put up a QR code on the screen. You can use if you want to make a donation to Coalition for Clean Air, or you can go to our website ccr.org and make a donation to support things like this webinar. Thank you, Director Butler and Dr. Gold. You gave us freely of your time and resources and expertise this afternoon. It's so helpful to so many people. I want to thank my staff, Jordan Brazil, Diana Alvarado, and Nicole Roberts. They helped make this event possible today. They've been putting in tons of work and just doing a great job of making these things happen. And I do want to remind you, we won't be able to answer all your emails and all your questions individually because of the resource issue here at Coalition for Clean Air. But we will post a recording of this webinar as soon as our little computers can process it. We'll put it up on YouTube. We'll have a link to it on our homepage. Please, feel free to share it with others who haven't had a chance or missed it. The webinar that we did last week has already had like 21,000 views in 8 days on YouTube. So we know that other people do want to listen to these and learn from them. I want to thank you again, all of you, for being here with us. We hope that you're persevering. There was a wonderful, I didn't talk about media coverage. There was a wonderful story in the Los Angeles Times either the last day or two about how the community of Santa Rosa came together after the Tubbs fire and how they worked together to rebuild and how they had a much stronger community as a result of it. I can only hope that that's what we do here in the Southern California area. I've seen very good coverage on the LAist website. And I've also seen great coverage of the LA Times, and I thank the press for doing the job that they're doing, keeping people informed, and everybody who's helping out here. Please stay safe. Have a good evening, a good weekend, and as I tell everybody, may every breath that you take be a breath of clean air. And I guess for Mark's sake, I'm going to say for every drop of water you drink, be a drop of clean water. Okay, and thank you so much. Goodbye for now, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.